Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Adorable Anarchist World here on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Today is August 3rd, 2014, and man, do I have a lot to talk about this week. And first off, I just want to talk about something somewhat unrelated, but in a way it sort of made me think of some of the things here that I'm going to be talking about today. It's amazing what you can learn from even people. I should rephrase that. It's amazing what you could learn from someone who's in their final years and is in the final stages of madness. And it's amazing. It's interesting because I recently had to deal with someone at work, so that's why I'm bringing this up. And it made me want to talk a little bit more about some of the things I'm going to talk about today. But it really is. It's interesting to see, like, sorry, a little bug, what can really trigger such a strong emotional response with people. And yeah, that's all I really have to say with that. But on that note, I would like to start talking about Israel and Palestine, because it's amazing to see just what a strong emotional response you can get from people when you question the legitimacy of Israel. But then again, I'm not here to defend or attack either state. So, and really, the thing is that this current conflict in Israel and Palestine, it's nothing new. It's been going on for a very, very, very long time. And even then, technically, the Jews weren't the first people to, or I shouldn't, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to say it. They weren't the first people to claim Israel or that general land as their own. And I find it amazing what excuses people will come to just to defend the state of Israel. Like, my dad's a very hardcore Catholic guy, and he's trying to win me over to Catholicism, to convert me back, I guess you could say, because when I was younger I was, but that's a whole other story. He is constantly defending Israel and defending Israel's tactics. And when I brought up to him the subject, he's like, "Oh, Hamas supposedly kidnapped these 3 teen boys, and that's the reason for this bombing." And I point out to him, it's like, is that really a logical solution? I mean, if some kids got kidnapped in the neighborhood by us here, would our reaction be bomb the fuck out of the place until it's complete rubble? And Christ, I don't know if you've seen any of those pictures out of Gaza, but Google at your own risk. That seems to be something that a lot of people seem to be saying. But it's true, because the before and after pictures of Gaza especially, it's complete rubble now. And it's amazing just what Israel has done. And, you know, I've been saying this a lot online lately, but it's amazing how history is just a revolving door for situations like this. So, like, I'm going to go back to the beginning, to the most recent conflict. We're not going to talk about, we're not going to go into the ancient stuff. You can go on that on your own. We're just going to address the most recent things. So basically, this all started off with, people fleeing Europe to escape persecution. And so these people naturally migrated to a place that they thought they would be welcome. And what better is the first place to think of than the land that is greatly talked about in your religion? Now, and why they decided to name their state Israel after the state in the Bible that leaves God and goes to worship idols instead of Judea, I still don't understand, but who knows, maybe that's some kind of Zionist twist or something. But so fleeing, and it's amazing how this is oh so similar to us coming to the Americas. My ancestors weren't directly involved in the invasion here. As a matter of fact, we're fairly newer immigrants, to say the least. And Hitler himself called us the natives of Europe and wanted to go out of his way to wipe us out, just like the Americans did with their natives, just as Israel now is with their natives. Basically, look at the situation of the first people who came here to America. They were fleeing persecution in Europe and came to the new world seeking a new home, independence, and just freedom from the tyranny that they were living under. And yet, in the process, they ended up becoming the oppressors of the native inhabitants there. A bunch of people fleeing, migrating to find a new home, ended up becoming the oppressors of another person's home. And eventually they forced them to leave that land as well. And that was another thing I point out to people who are pro-Israel is, Palestinians, they cannot own land within Israel, which is very strange, because like with a conservative guy like my dad, private property is a very big thing. So I thought that, like, listen, you have to at least admit that they should be allowed the same land rights that anyone else should be allowed to. And of course, this is normally the point where most people who support Israel will decide to call me a Holocaust denier, which is strange because that had nothing to do with the previous topic of discussion. And, here's another funny thing with Israel when you look into it. It was founded on it pretty much was founded on terrorism, kind of like how Hamas retaliates against Israel today. It was founded on the same tactics. Many people don't really like to talk about that, though. So eventually you had a big conflict here in Israel with Israelis trying to take land, with Palestine being the larger state at this point. And so the UN drew up a plan that would divide lands evenly amongst both of them. And this, if anything, may have created more conflict than it did solve, because the UN plan, it didn't let the land ownership happen naturally. It just gave the land and tried to divide it up evenly. And if you've ever looked at history, things like this never work in general. The Pope tried to divide the Americas amongst Portugal and Spain, but we saw how that went. England came, the Dutch came, and it's a mess trying to divide lands up amongst people. And this is something better left naturally and peacefully up to the individuals. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who would beg to differ on that and would call that utopian. Anyways, not long after that, the Six-Day War happened, and the Six-Day War was basically a war that made it so Israel took a lot of Palestinian land. And the thing was, the Six-Day War, in a sense, it never really ended, because Israel still takes land from Palestine. They're still doing it today. That's why I'm talking about this now, is because of the recent things in Gaza. And it's amazing to see how people who want freedom will defend a state that so blatantly mirrors fascism. Fascism doesn't have to just do with I shouldn't say German, with Aryan Brotherhood and all. No, fascism can be any type of nationalistic upbringing taking too far. And in a sense, that's what we see in Israel. I mean, really, do you see a difference between Hitler up there saying the German people are the master race, and the head of Israel up there saying we are God's chosen people? It is virtually no difference, and the tactics are both the same too. There's so many Palestinian refugees today. You think Israel would want to look at that and say, maybe we're doing kind of the same thing that Hitler did to us. And the evidence is overwhelmingly against Israel, especially when you look into the war crimes, which are really, really just brutal. And I'm not going to speak any more about that. I'm just going to say, Google is the Israeli war crimes in Gaza at your own risk. I did, and wow. I now understand why war never changes. And another thing I want to talk about right now is something that I see popping up a lot from the more conservative people who I debate on Facebook, which is Hamas and the Palestinians using human shields. I cannot find any evidence for this. Like, I wouldn't be surprised because both sides in war always suck, but I cannot find any evidence for this. So if you can find any evidence for Hamas using human shields, please go ahead, send it to me. I'm an open book for this type of stuff. But I will say this: the one thing that really did turn me off from any sort of Palestinian support or anything was seeing what Hamas's drug laws were. And for me, that really was like, I cannot support a state that will put people to death simply for what they put in their own body, even if they are doing it peacefully, free of coercion. And I'm just going to explain this the way I explained it to someone else, because the reason why I won't put up that red picture on Facebook is because I cannot throw myself behind Hamas or the Palestinians, because it's still a statist entity, and it still will probably be just as oppressive as any other state. And do I have anything else I could say on this subject? Well, I guess I could just close this on this. War never has any good sides. And let's look at the Ukraine for a second. Something inside of me wants to say that I want to support the rebels in the East. But I cannot say that because they are just as brutal and as totalitarian as Kiev. And what you see is two sides of the same coin, but both evil. You have the imperialistic European Union, and I won't call them communists because they've done really good with their public relations and changing that, but you have the more communistic, traditional, I don't know how you say it, East, which is more in touch with Russia. And one thing that you do find when you look into it is that these rebels are calling for something similar to the U.S. with states of a certain degree of autonomy. Now, and I can agree with that, but when I look into the types of things that the rebels have done, I have to back off my support, just like Israel and Palestine. When I actually look into Palestine and I see the policies of their government, I cannot morally or ethically throw them support. All right. And now to move on to my next subject, wage slavery, and wow, 3 viewers. That's the highest I ever got on this thing. Now, recently another podcaster here on the network decided to talk about wage slavery, and I sort of dabbled into it with my episode on mutualism, but I didn't really go the full 9 yards with it, I don't think. I brought up that typical argument that she tried to debunk. They pay us only enough to get by, but not enough to live. And I'm going to go deeper into this now, because it seems like this person did a good job with debunking the socialist definition of wage slavery. But as for the overall universal definition of wage slavery, they kind of missed a lot. So I just want to point this out first. When we talk about wage slavery, we're referring mostly to corporate and imperial powers that exploit the workers. And one thing that I would just like to say first, these imperial and corporate powers are really not free market entities at all. I mean, just look into the works of John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Like this isn't capitalism, it's an invisible empire. And these are, and I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but if anything, these businesses, these corporations, they are nothing more than state-sponsored entities that have taken on the legitimate face of business. You remove that mask in front of them and you're going to find nothing but a state crony capitalist fiasco. And another thing that this person brought up was that, oh, I'm hiring you and I'm helping you, and if I'm the person hiring you, I'm doing whatever I can. Well, in this corporate entity, and then I pointed this out in another episode, and I need to get better with the drawing mechanic on here, but what you generally have is a pyramid that exists within all imperial and corporate entities. And this pyramid structure I don't think would survive in your average free market because it's simply too inefficient. And the thing is, most of the time the people who are doing the hiring are on the same level as the workers on the bottom. And the people above the hierarchical people are generally the more corrupt, the more who, they're just cronies. There's no other way to describe it. And they are very good at exploiting workers because to those above, the worker is expendable. They could just rip you off and scab you over any chance they want. And, you know, I don't like having to use these socialist terms, but that's essentially what it comes down to. And I challenge this person, have you ever worked for fast food? Have you ever worked for a big corporate entity? I've worked a mutualist job before, and I have worked for many of corporate jobs. And in the corporate world, you are much more likely to get ripped off. You are much more likely for your boss to skip you on your pay. There's a lot of problems, basically. Like, basically, 1 week they could overpay you, and then for the weeks after that, you'll get almost nothing. And it's because of that term, they give us enough to get by, but not enough to actually live, actually comes from. Because how are you supposed to live off of little to nothing? To them, you're not an asset. You're not someone who's working for them. Your labor means nothing to them. You are a dollar sign. The less they can give you to get more labor out of you, they will. And that is simply how this corporate structure works today. And it's depressing that people still seem to think that these are free market entities. Because even if someone is hiring you, they are still under the foot of the corporate state. And we have become wage slaves. Another thing that this person seemed to not touch on at all, and I was very surprised about this, was that just the fact that we have a minimum wage, a minimum requirement that we must be paid at, just goes to show you that we are, as a matter of fact, wage slaves. Just the fact that there's a minimum requirement shows that we are slaves to wage. And it's also funny how this person tried to describe the job market today as the way they did. Because the job market today is nothing like what it used to be in earlier years of my life, I guess you could say. But the job market today has turned into an utter complete joke. You go around, you find people will have hiring signs in their window, but they're not really looking for people to hire. They just want applications. It's a complete buyer's market on the business's end, and that's not a good thing because it doesn't help the person looking for a job. It just makes it harder to find one. And I'm not saying regulated or anything, not at all. I'm just saying these corporate structures that create these wage slave environments and everything, they are the ones feeding this problem. And another thing is this, I don't know what else I could really say about wage slavery at this point, because I covered it pretty much in the other one. So I guess I'll move on and now talk about pantheism. And this sort of goes back to the woman I talked about in the beginning. And this woman is so mad, and she's so, like, I'm not even going to say what she said, because if I did, I'd probably get kicked off the network. But it's someone like this who's going into madness at the ending days of their life. I can only wonder how death will treat them. Like, what kind of great reveal will this be to them? Because they've already lost so much of their mind as it is. And for those of you who don't know, pantheism is the belief in divinity that exists within the universe and nature. And I'm sort of exploring this more because most of the tests or quizzes, whatever you want to call them online that I've taken, have put me up as a pantheist. So I thought I would look into this more. And the thing is, when I look into pantheism, I see this idea that God is a metaphor for the universe. And I both agree and disagree with that. I think it can be a metaphor for the universe. I just don't want it to be a metaphor for the universe. Because, really, it seems like just a slap in the face to how magnificent and beautiful both nature, the world around us, and the universe when we gaze out to it really is. I mean, you want to look out to this and say that it's God. In a sense, I feel like it's kind of a bitch slap to whatever it is, to the magnificence of just what it really is. And, you know, the term that I've always used was Taoist atheism, because that's always seemed to sum that up. But even then, I don't know if I can say that, because the more I look into Taoism, because here's the thing, these Eastern philosophies, they begin out like a lot like libertarianism, in my opinion. Because these philosophies of the East, they begin with saying that we're all connected unconsciously. But the more you look into that and the more you learn that isn't the case. As a libertarian, you first come to think that, oh, a libertarian is someone who's socially conservative. I mean, socially liberal and fiscally conservative. But the more you delve into that philosophy, the more you learn that that never was the case. And in the case for pantheism, I don't know whether to consider it something theistic or atheistic, because there's so many different types. Podcast, he's a deist, and the way he laid it out, it seemed like that was the ideal. Uh-oh, it looks like we're dealing with some connection issues, but I hope you guys can still see me. But this friend, he laid out the perfect reasons on why the deism, the deist God, is the ideal libertarian God. And what he pointed out to me was that all gods in most all theologies that are theist, not counting the Eastern philosophies, they generally seem to be very much so interventionists. They are, they intervene with the world around them. Even if they say they don't, they do a hell of a lot, which kind of makes them into hypocrites. And the idea of the deist God is that he created this universe around him, but he doesn't interfere in anything, that he is just letting the motions pass. He's watching this creation of his develop, I guess you could say. And just the fact that he's a non-interventionist, it seems like that makes a lot more sense as a sort of libertarian God than as opposed to the Christian gods or the Hindu gods or whatever there is out there. And that's another thing with libertarianism and theism is libertarianism was founded on this great anarchist ideology. I mean, why do you think one of the first slogans was "No government, no gods"? So I guess I can understand the deist perspective, or a pantheist perspective, and I have great respect for a Gnostic perspective as well, which I should probably look into Gnosticism a lot more, because I've read a few lost books of the Bible, but I never really took the leap and truly went in to look into Gnosticism. But from what I can tell, it means one is who is not knowledgeable. And that sounds interesting enough for me to think that maybe it can be something interesting. Well, looks like I am now reaching the end of my time here today. And if you made it through to this end, I'd like to say congratulations and thank you for sticking it out, because I know what it can be like trying to get sidetracked and then never come back to listening to something. And what else can I say? As for Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd review, that should be coming out soon. After that, I think I have a good idea in mind, because religion is always the thing that I'm easier with dealing with than, say, the state. So I thought, leading up until New Year's, I'm going to try and review every book of the Bible weekly with revelations leading up to New Year's Eve. If New Year's Eve is on a Sunday. If it's not, who gives a shit? And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now I'm about to go take a long car ride to South Florida. And for all you out there, I hope you enjoy whatever's up next here on the Voluntary Virtues Network. This is Mitchell Wiechek of the Adorkable Anarchist World, trying to remain optimistic in the age of imperialism.